you want to go with a property manager that has a strong presence in your local area. If you're a property manager who's maintaining the grounds, you need to keep it relatively clean so you don't scare away prospective tenants. That's something that I think is super important for any sponsors to do.
It's almost similar to syndicators. Like, say, how do you know if somebody's a good sponsor? Like, a lot of times they'll ask the sponsor to make referrals or references to investors, but it's probably the same thing with property manager. They're not going to give you the names of people that don't like them.
References is important because you want to ask in your community who had a good experience of running your property. The thing is that sometimes property managers don't do a lot of marketing. They do a lot of word of mouth. I actually favor more with property managers that's been in business for 15 plus years because they've seen everything and they've been around the block, especially when there's a downturn.
You actually go visit nearby properties to kind of experience sort of what the tenants experience.
When you go in as a secret shopper, you get
really excited for this episode. I'm always excited actually when I'm covering a topic that I'm by no means an expert in, and that's why I love bringing in experts to the real estate syndicator community, because that's really what the whole idea was at the beginning of this experiment, was for me to not just talk about legal stuff, which I know a lot about obviously, but to talk about everything that real estate syndicators need or appreciate, including due diligence and underwriting and this and that and taxes and marketing and this and that and the other. And in this case, I wanted to focus a little bit on property management because I've got Diana Lin today, who is, and I'll let her introduce herself. I know she's a partner over at NaVi Ventures. And the reason that I wanted her to come on is because she did this amazing post on, I think it was LinkedIn. And she basically was talking about her process of hiring a property manager. And she's in charge of, you do asset management and acquisitions, and of course does all the property management. So wanted to bring Diana on to go through this checklist that she has, or at least, or I have. I don't know if she has it. Diana, I don't know if this is your checklist or I just took it from all of your interviews and had my team put it together. So we'll see. But Diana, thanks so much for joining us. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, Mauricio, no, thank you for having me here. Basically, I'm based in Dallas, Texas, and I've been real estate investing since 2018. And prior to doing real estate investing full time, I was actually a practicing architect. So been doing that for about 10 years, did 2 years in China, about the 8 years in Texas. And afterwards, I kind of transitioned over to full-time real estate investing. First off, as a passive investor, so invested in about 1,000 plus units as a LP investor. And then when I transitioned over to be an active sponsor as a GP in 2021, and that's when I started to focus more on the acquisition and operational sides. So got a lot of exposure to the operational side in that sense. That's an extension looking for property managers and working with property managers. So had some, experience and tidbits about how to sort of navigate and vet property managers. And most recently, we have we've replaced our property manager in one of our properties. And so that's one of the reasons why I just recently went through that experience of replacing our property manager. And we're also looking for a property manager on another project as a ground up development for multifamily. So in kind of had some hands and input and experience in looking at property managers in general. So happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for thanks for being here. And we have a lot of different levels of expertise in the community. Some people are just starting out. Some people have been doing it for a while. Some people are experts. I mean, we literally have the whole gambit. So for those who are just kind of starting out, Diana, you want to maybe let them know, what the difference is between maybe a property manager and an asset manager. Like, you're the GP in a syndication. Mm-hmm. What exactly does a property manager do versus what you guys do as a GP? And why do you really need to hire a separate property manager?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I know that when I was kind of looking into being a general partner, it was like, okay, well, why do you need an asset manager when you have a property manager? There's a big difference. So the property manager is essentially a company that oversees day-to-day basis of the property, right? And the asset manager, they overlook and touch base with the property manager about once a week or every day as much as you want, and look at the KPIs and metrics of the property itself to make sure that it's going to according to business plan. So as an asset manager, you you start off with one property, but then eventually you get a couple more properties under your belt. So it's really hard for an asset manager to be involved on a day-to-day basis. And so you rely on a professional property manager to take care of that. So if you have multiple properties, you at least meet once a week with the property manager to make sure that they're kind of going based on what your business plan is or what kind of issues going on that you can problem solve together. So asset manager really is more of a higher level manager, project manager of the property. And the property manager itself, they give the property manager monthly financials. And as an asset manager, you review those financials to ask questions to make sure that it's looking right, right? But essentially, you don't have to really look into managing tenant calls or work orders. That's really relegated for the property manager.
And I think you said a week, but I mean, is that how often do you meet with your property manager then as a GP?
I would say minimum once a week, right? And when you're especially going the first few weeks or first few months of operations, you're going to go through the capex, and so you're going to be a lot more involved in meeting with your property manager. So once a week at minimum, and sometimes when there's more issues, you can meet with them more than once a week. But once the property starts to stabilize, then we reduce it to once every other week. So every 2 weeks we start to meet with them, and so we don't ever lower to more than or less than once or twice a month.
Cool. And then do you guys put together like a master property management plan at the beginning of the project? Is that what you give, or is that something you guys develop over time?
So you're asking about whether or not we have a property manager checklist or
Well, when you bring a property manager on, do you come up with sort of a plan for the property that you're presenting to the property manager? Hey, here's our goal for the property. Please go execute this plan. Or is that something that the property manager develops with you? Or is it just your weekly meetings that you're having with the property manager?
yeah. So we work with the our general partners to kind of envision about what kind of property manager that we really want to have at this property, and to make sure that there is a larger vision of what we want. And so we get together with the property manager, we get that list, and then we start to interview these property managers that meets our criteria. But essentially, we do meet with the property manager to at least to be in the same page and same level to at least have them be on make sure that they are understanding about what we want to do to execute, right? So it really depends on each property, really. If one property is more about value add, another property is a development project. So each project has its own approach in terms of the master plan.
Cool. All right. Well, let's go through these, like this checklist that, again, I apologize. I think I was saying that you put it together, but I realized I may have just put it together myself. So I'm gonna go. I came up with 8. So I figured
Yeah,
let's
no, I'm
go
curious
through
to hear.
let's go through the 8. Actually had a couple others that you may already have, or maybe I missed one. But and as we go through these guys, you feel free to, again, as always, I've got my questions and my agenda here, but you guys have questions as we go through these, please drop them in the chat and we'll have Diana answer them as we go through them. But all right, so number 1 I have here, which I think you mentioned is probably the most important one. I think it was the subject of your post itself, and that is the experience and track record of the property manager. You want to talk a little bit about why that's on your checklist or why that's important? It's kind of obvious, but tell us why that's your like most important thing for you.
Yeah, no, that is definitely number 1 on the list. Um, not just experience, but also relevant experience, right? So if the property manager has experience in property managing for 20 years, but they've only been managing like 20 units or like C class properties, then maybe that property manager is experienced, but they're not relevant experience to a 100 to 200 unit property that may be A class, right? So trying to find a property manager that is appropriate to manage your property is super important, because a class property manager probably have a lot more different experience than a C class. You would think that an A class property manager would be able to handle a C class, but it's completely different, because a C class property would have a different set of issues and problems that you have to address on a day-to-day basis versus a class A property. So definitely experience, and on top of that, you want to see the track record of the property manager to see if they have the kind of operations to be able to take care of a property. So for example, if a property manager is used to taking care of stabilized property, they have excellent track record of that, but do they have relevant experience to say, for example, turn around a property from 70% occupancy to 95%, right? That is a different skill set to have as a property manager versus another property manager that's just used to taking care of a stabilized property. So no, number one is by far the most important.
Yeah, it's really no different than when you're vetting a sponsor, right? If you're an LP and you're vetting the sponsor, it's like, well, what is their track record? What is their experience? And yeah, you may be an expert in mobile home parks and you've been doing that successfully for 20 years and you've been crushing it. But hey, this happens to be a multifamily or happens to be a self-storage or happens to be some other asset class. It's a completely different ballgame. So great point. And then I think I saw you, I think maybe on the post, do you then as part of that number one checklist, do you actually go visit nearby properties, right, to kind of experience sort of what the tenants experience? Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. That one's I can do like a whole hour just about that experience. But
yeah, but talk about that, because I think a lot of people don't do that. Like they'll just hire the property manager based on their, maybe they'll do what the other things we're going to do on the checklist, but they don't actually go and visit the other properties that you don't own, but that they're managing, so you can experience that.
Oh yeah. So we get a small short list of property managers that we like and we've already interviewed. And then so when we get the short list, it's like now the due diligence that we take a step further is to actually visit those properties. But we don't just visit them, we visit them as if we're potential tenants, right? So then when you go in as a secret shopper, then you get the actual interface and experience of what you would get as a tenant, and go from the process of step A to step C of how they sort of onboard or at least sort of greet the potential tenants or prospective tenants, and whether or not your experience with that interface of the leasing agent or the property manager is pleasant and has a higher likelihood of leasing from that property manager. So when we had the top 3 property managers, we decided, okay, we're gonna check out the top 5 properties that have a similar vintage, location, and size. So we split up in teams and I go check out 5 properties and then my other partner check out 5 other properties. And we have a standard checklist of what criteria we'll be looking for and we rate them, right? And so I would go to a property thinking that, based on the website, it should look pretty nice and clean and the tenant profile looks great too. But when you actually visit them, it's a completely different experience, right? And so I think it's super important for sponsors to not miss that step. You need to have yourself or someone on your team to actually walk through the property, talk to the leasing agent, talk to the residents that are at the property, look at the curb appeal. Are they maintaining it? Are they keeping trash clean, or keeping the property relatively clean? And so, I think it's an important step to have. Like, for example, I go to the property and I talk to a tenant just walking around. It's like, hey, how do you like living here? How do you like your property manager, right? He said, oh, the property manager is good, but it's kind of not that safe here. We just had a shooting yesterday. And I'm like, oh, okay. And let's write down notes. I drive around and the windows have like aluminum foil and there's like some wood that's like covering the window and it just looks bad. Like it doesn't look like, as a property manager, you should come to that tenant. It's like, hey, we can't have that happening or it doesn't look good, right? Or when I was driving out, I see a disposed mattress right next to the dumpster, but I see this homeless guy just kind of chilling on the mattress, just eating pizza. So like, I was like, okay, well, if you're a property manager who's maintaining the grounds, you need to keep it relatively clean so you don't scare away prospective tenants, right? So you don't get that experience until you're actually at the property. So that's something that I think is super important for any sponsors to do, is to actually walk the property, engage with the residents and also the leasing agent to make sure that they're getting kind of experience that you're gonna want to have at yours, right?
You know, Paul asked a really great question in the chat, which is a lot of syndicators now are also property managers. And does that come into play when you're deciding on a property manager in terms of like competition? I mean, are you hesitant to go hire a property manager as also a syndicator, for example, or is that in your concern at all?
Yeah, that's a great question because when I was kind of learning in the space, what I've heard is that if the property is like 50 units or smaller, you should manage it yourself. But after being in a couple of years, it really depends on the operator whether they want to be hands-on and want to take care of the day-to-day operations. I don't think it's a good idea for a sponsor to be a property manager themselves, even though it's a great experience, but you will get tied up on the day-to-day operation of a smaller property and not be able to step out and scale to acquire other properties. Because now your full-time job is to maintain the property rather than focusing on your main business, which is really the investment portion and also looking for other properties. So what I would say is even though if it's a smaller property, I would recommend to have a professional property manager, even if it's a mom and pop, right? Our first property was actually a 22 unit property and we hired a professional property manager to manage that, even though it's just 22 units. The fees are going to be higher for a smaller property and compared to a larger property. So 100 unit would definitely be, smaller PM fee. But I would recommend that you would still have a property manager to take care of the day-to-day operations, because I actually self-manage a single family rental, and just even managing that myself, it was already taking up a lot of time. So I actually ended up hiring a property manager to take care of my one single family rental at one point because it was taking time away from my multifamily business.
Cool. All right, let's go to number two. We spent quite a bit of time number one, which I actually knew we were going to do that because I thought number one was probably the most important. So number one is obviously experience, track record. Go check them out and see how they're doing with them. Number two was local market knowledge. Talk about number two. How important is their knowledge of the local market?
Yes, so that's a great question. So the property manager, same thing, kind of expanding on the first point, which is relevant experience. If the property manager is regional and is kind of focused on, say, for example, southeast of the US, right? You wouldn't want to hire that property manager to hire your Dallas property, because this property manager is mostly focused on, say, Florida, right? And they maybe have one or two properties in Texas, but the majority of their presence are in Florida. You want to go with a property manager that has a strong presence in your local area. So in this example, for my experience, is that we want to go with a property manager that has a big presence, or at least operates a couple of property in the Dallas area. We interviewed, when we're going through that interview process, replacing our property manager. One of the short lists is that one of the property manager has a couple in Houston or in Fort Worth, but only don't have any properties they manage in Dallas. So that was one of the downside of going with that property manager, is that we like them a lot, but then they don't have relevant local experience. But in terms of local market insight, you want to ask your property manager to provide a report, or at least a comp report, to make sure that what they're providing is at least in terms of business plan, to be able to operate your property. So asking them for an example of a budget or pro forma of your property is definitely important, because they need to at least use that as an example for you to assess whether or not this property manager is professional enough to provide these type of reports.
Cool. That's number two. So number one is experience and track record. Number two is local market knowledge. Number three I have is references and reviews.
Yes. So references is important because, at least for me, like, you need to with the network that we're in, we know a lot of people in our community. So it's, you want to ask in your community who you know that had a good experience of running your property. So the new property manager that we have at our property in Dallas actually was through reference. And this is it was actually a reference through me, because I had this property manager when I was an LP on the deal. And this deal did extremely well. And the sponsor that sponsored the deal highly recommended using this property manager to me. So when I presented this property manager as a potential replacement, that they become one of our shortlists and eventually became the property manager that we switched to. And so the thing is that sometimes property managers don't do a lot of marketing, right? So they do a lot of word of mouth. So, and that's how we found property manager that we're using right now, and is through reference through me, but my reference came from another reference of a sponsor that was an LP on. So when we did the shortlist too, not only did we, go through the shortlist, but we also asked the property manager themselves to provide references of other clients they work with. So we want to reach out to them and also ask them their experience, their honest experience of how they had with that property manager. So references are definitely important for vetting.
Yeah, I'm glad you said the last thing, because I was going to ask you in terms of, it's almost similar to syndicators. Like, say, how do you know if if somebody's a good sponsor? Like, a lot of times they'll ask the sponsor to make referrals or references to investors, but I always feel like they're always going to give the best, the investors that are the happiest. It's probably the same thing with property manager. They're not going to give you the names of people that don't like them. They're going to probably pick their top 2 or 3 clients. How do you get around that issue in terms of like, well, the list you're giving me is obviously the people that are going to say nice things about you?
Yeah, so you want to make sure you get like references from all around, right? So not just from the property manager, but also the people in your community, right? So I reach out to you, like, hey, Mauricio, have you heard this property manager? Like, what's your experience? What did you hear about, right? So maybe it's not just the community of the sponsors that you're around, but also vendors that have worked directly with them, or lenders themselves. So as long as that you have a strong community, I would suggest to tap into that resource and ask as many references, or at least as many references as you can. So yes, I would agree that it would be biased with the sponsor themselves.
Cool. I got number 4 is financial management, evaluating the company's capability in financial management. That's being a crucial factor. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So financial management, are you talking about
I'm
accounting?
talking about their process for budgeting, rent collection, handling delinquent accounts, kind of all of these financial management.
Yeah, so at least in my experience, I've had different interface and experience with other property managers, how they handle their financials. And so with that type of experience, then I would apply it to when I go through vetting property managers. So when I go through the interview process, like, hey, can you send me an example of your monthly financials, right? And so they would send me the monthly financials. I'll use that as another factor, point of assessing that property manager. Another experience I have is when I go through reaching out to property managers to interview them on a new build. They send me the pro forma, a lease up and stabilized pro forma. And so when I have 3 different property managers giving me their version of lease up and stabilized for pro forma, I compare on the professionalism of how they lay it out and the detail nature of their layout, or at least the pro forma. And that helps me sort of understand how they would be going about if I were to work with them on their financial management. So that's probably one of the things that I look at as well.
One of the things that I added to this, but this might be part of the financial management, or that might be a part of one of the next ones. How important is it for you on the tech side, like the platforms they're using or how they're communicating to you? So whether it's financial reports or whether it's just communication with you, how important is it the technology? Are you cool if they're just sending stuff on an Excel spreadsheet, or are you expecting now some really integrated software and platforms?
Yeah, no, I'm used to working with a property manager that works with a professional platform. So say, for example, Yardi or Resman. I haven't yet worked with a property manager that just kind of go through old school manual Excel. So it's hard for me to kind of say that, but I think that if I were to see a property manager say that just kind of go through old school, that probably is a right fit for me because I'm aware of the tools that's available, and if they are old school, it's like okay, well then they're going to kind of be a step behind the other competitors, right?
All right, cool. So I got number one, experience and track record. Number two, local market knowledge. Number three, reference and reviews. Four, financial management. I got number five is maintenance and repairs, having a reliable network of contractors and an efficient systems for handling maintenance.
Yeah, so like when we talk to the property managers, we ask them as like, okay, what do you do? What's the process like when there is a request for work orders? And a lot of time it's kind of kind of generic, so you don't really quite know exactly what happens, and it's really hard to say until you actually work with them and how they manage those work orders. So I would say that sometimes the maintenance and repairs are either managed by the property managers or sometimes through the CapEx team. So the property that we have in Dallas is we manage work orders through our property managers, but major CapEx item that need repairs, we have our own CapEx team that handles that. So it kind of varies in each property on how the maintenance and work orders are addressed on that. So it's hard for me to say on that part.
Yeah, it's just reminding me like this is really my list. This is not really even your list. I just came up with this list. So maybe the better question would be then, do you look at the maintenance and repair as part of your due diligence, or is that just something you look at once you hire them? Is it part of your criteria when you're evaluating property managers, how they handle repairs and all that stuff?
I mean, it could be part of a question is like, how quickly do you resolve them? And I think every property manager has their own generic, like, one-liners, like, yeah, we address them in 1 week, right? So it's hard for me to say that it is a criteria when we don't really quite experience it until you're in it. Or
Right.
it's through references, right? Through references, get the other owner's experience of how quickly they were able to address work orders.
All right, so let's get rid of it. So forget about that as your due diligence checklist. I have one as tenant screening, how they handle tenant screening process in terms of the background, all that stuff. Is that part of your due diligence? Is that something that's important to you when evaluating a property manager?
Tenant screening is another tricky question because tenant screening is becoming more an issue, especially with the with how applicants are able to fabricate their application, right? So property managers are going through the process of finding ways to screen them, and one of the tools that they use, and we're recently learning about this, is called Snapped. And they actually use a third party service provider that's able to help screen those kind of things. But for tenant screening, it's really hard to say if that should be even part of the due diligence, because every property manager has their own process, but the leasing agents themselves, they're not trained to be forensic scientists to make sure that it's a legit screening or a legit tenant
Right.
right? So I wouldn't know how to comment on that part.
That's good. I have communication down there. I assume that's an important one, how the property manager communicates with its clients.
Yes. And communication is also another tricky question too, right? Because the interview process would say, okay, how well do you communicate? And they would tell you, oh, as much as you want, right? And so that's kind of goes back into the original one of the criteria is the references through other owners. It's like how well do they communicate with you? And so you can rely on references, and you can kind of go by what the property manager say themselves as well. But when they're trying to gain your business, they'll say whatever they can to gain your business.
But is it common? Like, for example, this is coming up actually a lot in the LP world, right? So LP GP relationship where especially with what's going on now in communication between GPs. A lot of LPs are complaining that GPs aren't communicating well enough. And so I've noticed that LPs are starting to focus more on, okay, well, give me some samples of, I know you say you communicate once a quarter or you provide quote unquote reports. Can you send me templates or examples of prior reports that you've given your LPs? Is there something like that in the property management world where you would say, hey, send me sample or what exactly are you going to be reporting? Is that part of what you're looking at, or is every property manager completely different?
So yeah, communication, we ask them for the monthly financials, and sometimes they have a narrative in the beginning, right? And that's what we requested from them. And during our weekly meetings with our property manager, we have a weekly report that they fill in once a week to see the metrics of the performance of the property for that week. So that kind of communication is super important, but that is something more on the asset management side that we ask our property managers to implement. Because in the beginning, when we onboarded our new property manager, they have their own template, but to us as an asset manager, it wasn't detailed enough. So we actually gave them a template that we're used to using that has 3-4 times more details. And so they adapted to that type of weekly report template in order to communicate with us as a sponsor. So weekly reports, monthly reports, and also in terms of, I guess, tenant maintenance, right? To keep them communicated, or at least communicate with what's going on in the property. We actually asked them to put together a newsletter, monthly newsletter, to tell them the ongoing events, as well as new specials or concessions that we're offering at the property.
Cool. Okay. So give me, let me reread the ones I have. Let me know if there's anything else on your checklist that you look at before hiring or in the process of hiring the property manager. We've got the experience and track record. We got the local market knowledge. We got references and reviews. We got the financial management, how they handle that. We've got communication, how they communicate. I think platforms was a factor. Like how do they communicate, right? If they're communicating on, smoke signals, that's probably not a good sign. What else is on your due diligence checklist that you use when you're vetting property managers?
I would say how many years they've been in business, right? And that may tie to the first one where it's kind of a relevant experience, right? But if it's a property manager that just been launched in like last 2-3 years, then I would probably proceed with caution on a newer property manager. I actually favor more with property managers that's been in business for 15 plus years, because they've seen everything and they've been around the block, especially when there's a downturn. Another thing I would add is to have a performance metric where you would do your own research on third-party reports that has a list of numbers, at least say, like, for example, physical and economic occupancy of the property that they're currently managing, and kind of make your assessment from that. So getting a bunch of data and information from people, but as well as other reports, help you sort of assess whether or not this property manager is performing above standard or performing below standard. And if they are below standard, then you bring that as part of an interview question with the property manager. It's like, hey, how come this is currently 85% occupancy, as opposed to your other properties that are exceeding expectation, or at least like 95%? Is there something wrong with this one? And what are you doing to resolve it? So I think that would be important as well.
Yeah, where does that data live? Do you guys pull software like Yardi and other software platforms, or do you go to other sort of part of the referrals and references that you got from those people? How do you get that data? I guess I'm asking.
Yeah. And so Yardi is one of them, and there's also CoStar, and another software that I see a lot of property managers using is called ALN Data. And so I would reference all 3, or even more than 3 references, and you can do as much as you can and go crazy with the data, but at least get kind of snapshot, right? Because not all data are kind of made equal, right? Some data are old and expired or haven't been up to date. So you want to kind of get different references point, and then use that as a way to assess whether or not this property manager is doing a good job or not. On separately.
Kenneth had a great question too. He was asking about vetting potential tenants. Like when vetting potential tenants, would asking for a written verification of employment from the employer, a verification of deposit from the bank, are those things that are normal requirements? Because those are normal requirements for a mortgage when buying a property. Is that something you would look at when vetting tenants?
Yeah, so I think every property manager has their own strict criteria of vetting tenants. But one of them is to provide pay stub and written references. I don't believe is part of the requirement because it's so easy to fabricate that, right? So usually, like it's similar to qualifying for a mortgage where you want to provide the in the application about like 1 year of work history and what's your income, if you qualify for that income to be able to pay for that rent, right? So every property manager has their own different kind of criteria, and we review that with them, or we ask them about like give us what you guys are doing to vet these tenants. And as I mentioned before, there is an increased number of fraud in applying for apartments. So we use third-party softwares or services like Snap to help us screen these fake applications.
Yeah, I mean, Hannes was making that point in the chat that it's just incredibly easy to fabricate bank statements these days. I mean, honestly, these days you can fabricate video. I mean, with AI and everything, it's getting crazy. So just relying on I mean, it used to be like, well, I wouldn't rely on Excel spreadsheet because I can just make that up. And now they can literally falsify all kinds of stuff to make it. So that's a good question. Hey, if you guys have questions, put them in there because I'm going to be wrapping up here soon. One question I do have, it's more of a legal and not really a question, it's really an observation because this is something I learned many, many years ago through another attorney friend of mine. But that's the topic of insurance. I know that's not a super excited topic, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, Diana, but do you guys add your property managers or get some kind of insurance that covers things with regarding property managers? Do you know?
Do we cover things with property managers?
Yeah,
So
because one of the insurance things, and again, I'm not an insurance attorney, but one of the concerns or one of the potential exposures everyone has out there is that the property manager in some states and in some cases have shown that the property manager is basically an agent of the owner. So if the property manager does something to the tenants, especially I think the cases I've seen have to do with like sexual harassment or just they're doing something to the tenant and they end up suing the property manager, they may also lump in the owner of the property into that lawsuit. So just talk to your, I guess my point here is really not to put you on the spot, Dana, but it's really just talk to whoever your insurance broker is, insurance counsel, and whoever's handling your insurance. So at least make sure, look into that potential exposure regarding your property manager. Make sure that your insurance, either you're added as an additional insured to their policy or they're added as an additional insured to your policy, so that if anything does ever happen and there's a lawsuit against the property manager, they don't lump you back in, even though it was like, wasn't even my fault or I didn't even know about it.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that we did is that we put the property manager as an additional insured into our property. But it's also, whenever we do switch property managers, we need to ensure our lender as well that we're going to switch property manager. But
yeah, everybody should probably have a checklist actually of like what, just on your standard operating procedure, like what happens, what are the steps or checklists I need to do when I, like to your point, fire a property manager. What are the things I need to do? Like I need to call the lender, let them know. I need to call my insurance company, make sure we switch that. I need to do that. Because again, I don't know. I've been really into SOPs here in the last few things. Any other questions for Diana before we thank her and let her go for spending her time with us today? It's a really, really fascinating topic. We've actually now done two. I don't think I've released the one. We've done another episode of the differences between property management and asset management. So maybe I'll release those two together. But I'm going to stick around a little bit to answer a couple of legal questions that I've already had. And as always, I want to open up to Q&A. But Diana, thank you so much for taking the time away from your busy schedule to come help us out here in the real estate syndicator community. If people want to get a hold of you, other than checking out your LinkedIn, which is amazing. So if you're not following Diana on her LinkedIn, please do. Diana Lin. That's how I got the info from here. And then what's the best way that people can get a hold of you, Diana?
Yeah, you guys can reach out to me by email. It's Diana@NaVi-Ventures.com. I'm also on all the socials, so Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I'm the most active on LinkedIn, as Mauricio noted. So please feel free to add me
And talk about your meetup. You have a very unique, awesome meetup that you do, right?
Yes, I do. So once every other month, I host a meetup on a second Thursday in Dallas, Texas. And it's called Real Estate Ladies. And it's focused on highlighting female leaders in the commercial real estate space. And so every time we have a meetup, we highlight and we bring speakers to talk about their business. We have developers, we have a lender, we have syndicators that would come on to talk about the topic that we want them to talk about. So if any of you guys are local in Dallas, we'd love to have you guys join us. It's also open to men. So we get a pretty good attendance. About 50 plus people would come, and we get food and get drinks. We got sponsors. So just come over and have a good time.
Is that Timothy was asking whether it was for women only, and then you answered it. Is there a sign up for if somebody, because it says they're going to be in Dallas pretty soon? Is there somewhere they can go to sign up or find more info on it? In the meantime, if you guys have legal questions, start thinking about them as I answer them. Got babies in the house. I love it. Stacy, love it. Look at your puppy there.
Baby.
It's like a little blurry there, but
Yeah,
anyway, cool. There it is.
fur baby.
Real estate ladies, .10.eventbrite. Diana, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thanks,
having me.
Diana. Appreciate you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
If you'd like to join us live on these episodes and have a chance to get your specific question answered, you can simply go to realestatesyndicatorlive.com and register to be live on the show. Hope to see you then.